Welcome to the Pod Cultcast, where we talk about life, love, learning, and libido, and share our journey through polyamory and kink. I am Chastin.
Hi, this is Max.
I'm Hannah.
And this is Eric. This is a podcast where we talk about love and relationships, sex and kink, and polyamorous issues, and whatever else comes up. While we talk about these things, we will probably also touch on stuff like abuse and violence and mental health challenges. These can be difficult topics, so keep that in mind moving ahead.
Alright, so let's get into it. So we have been exploring how we got here, our origin stories, and check out our first and second episodes. Go to our website, www.podcultcast.com.
Cult with a V.
And, Cult with a V would make a great t-shirt.
Yeah, there you go.
We're the With a V Club, as opposed to the With a Y Club.
Right.
Is that one of
Do you want to explain the With a Y Club, or do we just keep moving past it?
I think we just keep moving past it. I think we let that be a mystery that the listeners can ponder when they're in the shower later. So today, we are going to talk to Hannah. Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah?
How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for asking. So, Hannah, how did you get here?
Gosh. So, Chastin was talking last time about growing up conservative, growing up Christian, and all the ways that was both supportive and challenging. I also grew up in a similar environment, but mine was very much on the neoconservative, neo-reformed side. I grew up in purity culture. And so my ideas about what family life was all about and what sex and sexuality were all about.
How would you define purity culture?
So purity culture is definitely about controlling sexuality. So I was raised with the idea that sex was only for marriage, and that we didn't talk about it, that it was negative, that all our conversations and thoughts about it were also negative and sinful. And the idea was that any kind of sexual or romantic encounter could defile you in some way. So if you were having impure thoughts, and for me, those thoughts could be, I would really like to hold the hand of this boy that I admire, that was compromising, made you less of a holy person. So that was pretty pervasive in my little core group of small church life. But even once I started interacting with the broader sort of fundamentalist evangelical world that I was part of, that was throughout, applied with very few, differences or nuances. That carried through, all the way into my 20s. I was in a parentally sanctioned courtship from 19 to 21 with someone I had already been considering my boyfriend for a couple of years before we finally got the stamp of approval. And I had made life partnership plans with this person. That was what the entire focus of purity culture as we experienced it was about, that if you're going to be dating somebody and getting to know them on a close personal level, the focus of that is to be about getting married, having children, raising a family for the glory of God. So we had made, our whole relationship was focused around that, and focused around laying plans for the future and how our life was going to be and how it was going to feel to come home to a house full of kids where I had, been doing my homemaking duties all day. But, it was a beautiful first teenage relationship. My high school crush and I got along great with all of our friends and family group. It was a very close-knit community that had a lot of great support in it. But
I don't want to necessarily derail you to define every term, but you said it was a parental sanctioned courtship. Do you want to just touch real quick on the difference between dating and a courtship?
Sure.
What that means?
So I'm going to say, because folks are probably already thinking it, I never read I Kiss Dating Goodbye. Because I wasn't supposed to think about relationships at all. That was mostly for my parents to decide. But teachers like Josh Harris with that book started what was really a new idea, that dating was bad. Dating was practice for divorce. So if you are getting to know somebody, you're becoming intimate on whatever level you are, and then you just move on to the next person, well, no wonder the divorce rate is high. What you should be doing is courting. That evokes the idea that we are going back to a time when relationships were courtly and pure, but it really was a completely new idea. that the only point of access to a young woman should be through her father. And then if you wanted to be in a relationship with a young woman, you would do that by observing her behavior. And, you know, if it was godly and seemed compatible, then you would approach that woman's parents and seek permission to get to know her better.
Okay.
And so that would be in a group setting or a family dinner until you sort of formalize that relationship with the goal of marrying that individual.
So when I think of courtship, I think about women as commodities, and that marriage was typically used to maintain finances in a family, especially if there was no son, and also to make political contacts and move yourself up in the world and things like that. So do you think that, and I don't want to, like Max said, I don't want to derail this, but do you think that fits in with the kind of courtship that you were doing at the time?
As far as sort of the intermarriage of families and maintaining status or gaining status through acquiring women?
Or just controlling women in general?
Yes, I think so. That wasn't directly related to my experience within that one relationship. And since that one relationship really spanned like all of my high school and college years, I had one window on that. But after that relationship ended, I immediately started to get some pressure that was basically like, if what you say is true, that you really want to serve God by being a wife and a mom, you're not trying hard enough. You should be going out and meeting more people. But going out and meeting more people meant maybe visiting other churches or, you know, there wasn't really an access point to that. And one really critical moment for me, my dad was pastor of our church. He had a lot of other pastor friends from around the country and around the world. One of his friends, acquaintances from, I think, Washington State, happened to be in the area. And he said, I know somebody who's in your position, meaning like single and godly, at my church who would love to be a pen pal with you. Can I give him your contact information so that you can write letters and see if you want to have a courtship together? And I was just laughing. Like I was stunned. That was not something I wanted at all to like develop this pen pal relationship with someone completely across the country from me. And I was just looking at my dad and he was like, well, why not? You know, like, well, if you want to get married, this is just how you're going to have to do it because there's not good enough people here. So that was very much like the reason that my courtmate and I had to work so hard to start with is that he was not from the same church denomination as mine. He had some slightly more Christian liberal views, and we really had to prove up to give my parents and my broader church family the idea that he was good enough to be in the group. He was Christian enough and serious enough to be in the group. So I would say not so much from like the historical view of like building wealth and maintaining wealth, but if the wealth is like women and children, which it kind of is, then absolutely they wanted to keep me in the fold. So anyone, regardless of where they were in the world and how our relationship developed, would have to agree to be in the fold. And the way that conversation between these two dads over my head concluded was with my dad saying, well, only if the young man's interested in moving here. And the other pastor saying, well, I think that would be a possibility. Let me talk to him.
Oh, wow.
And scene. So that never happened because I gave the revolted look and like stopped it there. But it certainly could have. And it just, that kind of thing really shook me because, you know, I was not completely isolated from, you know, the media and entertainment that gave me the idea that maybe dating was just fun and a thing that everybody did. And then like,
but sinful.
Right. But sinful. And so that came to permeate just every facet of relationships and especially romantic relationships. So, you know, getting constantly quizzed, even as I was in a sanctioned courtship, like, didn't you already see him once this week? I'm like, yes, but I love him, so I want to see him again. It was just,
you?
I know, how dare. So I really developed and imbibed this mindset that I was greedy, that my impulses were wrong, and that I needed to crush them. That relationship ended when we were 21 in a way that was kind of just natural because he was graduating from college. I hadn't even started yet. And we were just in different places in life. He was working a job that you know, he was traveling and having bonding time with this completely other set of people that I had never met. And that was just really violating sort of my sense of self and sense of the world, that like we're not together anymore. My relationship with purity culture and courtship pretty much ended with that relationship. My mindset was, I tried this. This is what my family wanted. This is apparently what God wants, and it didn't work. So I'm going to have to try something different. You know, from there, I had relationships that lasted, 6 or 8 months with some folks who were also in like similar community, who had been vetted by friends who were Christian. But as I'm going through it, I'm thinking, this is not really where I want to be. I don't think this is how I'm going to find somebody. And realizing that I wasn't the only one, honestly, who felt trapped by that mindset. I had a showmance. I guess we're all theater kids here. I had an extended showmance that went like...
I was never a theater kid.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you were in a performative
sport.
sport.
Hit orchestra.
You were a performative sport and a musician, so don't only me.
Not the same thing.
It is the
And
same
so you're,
thing.
okay. And so you're, 21? And you're living at home with your
I'm
folks.
21.
And you're active in the church.
I'm living at home. I am playing piano for hymns every Sunday. I am an example of how a single young lady should behave herself. I started becoming less of a great example over time, and so focus kind of shifted away from me, but I was still very much involved with church life, and with all the relationships and like people that I had grown up with, over decades there. So I'm living a double life, a very uninteresting, unexceptional double life of trying to maintain the type of demeanor that would cause a random pastor I just met to say, I know a fine young man who would love to get to know you, while also having relationships with friends and exploring and going out to drag shows at this cool place my club that everybody thought I should know about. And my world started to open up, but only on that one side, right? So there's still the duality there of like, I am both of these people, but never at the same time. I was still really focused on getting married, having kids, and living a life that my parents had. I mean, obviously, we all want to imitate what's put before us. And my parents had such a great relationship and gave us such a sense of just love and security growing up that I wanted to recreate that. And as I hit, teenage rebellion and early 20s rebellion, because we were still all living together as 6 adults in one house, what I wanted was to find my own partner, right? Like, you are not prioritizing me because I'm not your kid anymore. I'm not your baby anymore. You're prioritizing your marriage. So I should be prioritizing my partnership. And so that was the point of just conflict and challenge constantly. Going out again, you're staying out too late, blah, 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 blah. And it made relationships feel like this thing that I could never have and still have my family and my church. Like, because that was where the conflict was always coming in. Like, if I'm single, you love me. And if I'm dating, you're mad at me all the time. And we're just never going to get out of this cycle. So I just stopped talking to them about it and really shut
Talking to your parents?
Talking to my family. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my siblings too. I was just like, this is too hurtful. You don't want to know. I don't have the mental energy to like develop my own life and also break it down for you every day. So we're just going to not talk about this anymore. And we didn't for a little while. My brother and I got our own place together, our first apartment, and I started dating, like for real, for the first time. I've never met you before dating, getting to know new people outside of the church circles.
How old?
I was 24, 25. Okay.
So this is basically around the time you and I started.
Exactly.
Dating.
Yeah. My very first foray into, I'm gonna get a OkCupid profile, and sort of simultaneous with all of that, like a FetLife profile also, because, those were the clubs I had been getting introduced to. And And I was still in the process of sort of coming out to myself. There was no thought that I was going to come out to my family. At least not until I got, things sorted, because I just already knew that would go badly. So I was trying to figure out myself. And just be as open-minded as I possibly could, which honestly is not that very, but I try, and to learn as much as I possibly could. So I started out reading, and I should say, so I was living with my brother. He is engaged. At that time, his fiance ends up like staying over there sometimes, and then most of the time, and then all of the time. And this is all fine because they followed the pattern, right? They dated under parental supervision. They got engaged. So now they're definitely going to be married forever. And then they started living together. So it's kind of like they're pre-forgiven. Like they are living in sin, but it's temporary. Meanwhile, I'm just bringing people home and getting dirty looks like, what is wrong with you? Are you losing your mind? But I...
Wait.
Go ahead.
But by their own rules, isn't that 100% hypocritical?
That's how it felt to me, but apparently that's never how it has felt to them. They were always going to get married.
That was my first
you've
thought.
you've talked a little bit to me about this, and I think the way you've expressed it is that they kind of retconned the history into that to make it okay, right? Like they
right. So my sister-in-law, while they were dating, they broke up for a period of like 1 week because they were long distance for a while and it was really tough. And then whenever they got back together, it was one of those like first relationship, like, oh my God, I can't live without you kind of breakup experiences. And then they just never ever thought about not being together again, which can be a beautiful thing. It happens to a lot of couples. But I think that's why. I think it was like we already tried it both ways. Like we were together and then we were apart for 5 days and then we were back together. So that's how we really know that we're never going to be apart again. And that was what made it cool, was that they had already committed to a lifelong relationship. So meanwhile, I am having a moral crisis.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. I, the good kid, have now been surpassed in good kidness by my siblings. And have to sit with the fact that, like, I want to kiss girls. And, and it's kind of sexy to have someone beat me up sometimes.
Yeah.
And I like to go out and drink and then come home and cuddle with someone. And, just like all of these bizarre revolutionary things are happening in my world. So I can never be the good girl again. So like, that's a weird identity thing to have happen. But more importantly to this origin story, that weird identity thing meant that I gave up on ever having a family. I gave up, and this was a deal that I made with myself, right? This is not a long period of time where I have time to process like what's going to be good for me and what's not. It's night and day. Like that thing didn't work. So I have to do this other thing now. And now that I'm doing this thing, I will never be a good Christian. I will never be a good daughter. I can never get married and have kids like I have always planned to do. And I will never have true love in my life. And those were the deals that I made with myself because I thought if I'm going to cut these ties and really be fully myself, I have to be willing to give up on everything that I had planned and dreamed so far, which, hey, is growing up. But it was a weird, awkward, like quarter life crisis version of growing up that could have happened more naturally, I think, starting in my teens if I had been open to having a conversation with myself and then with the people that were important to me. But that window had already closed. So it was all just an internal sort of struggle. And so that's how I was approaching dating at that time, was that, I love being around people. I love learning new things. I want to meet as many people and learn as many new things as I can. But I am never going to have the relationship that was modeled for me, which was a lifelong commitment and partnership that became not just the most important relationship of my parents' lives, but the most important thing ever that could possibly happen to them, had happened so far in the past and was defining the rest of their lives. So I was not going to have that. And yeah, Justin, that's about the time that I met you. And I was like, date
Hannah.
all the girls.
Hi, Hannah. I'm a girl you dated. Yeah, so you and I met at it was a polyamory potluck. I remember going like, oh, that person's cute. I don't know what that person's deal is, but they're cute. And then we met, and then I saw you on OkCupid, and I think that's when we planned a date. And our first little date was the most adorable date ever because we made soup and sandwiches at your apartment, and there was the big bean bag.
There was the big bean bag.
There's the big bean bag.
Okay.
And we
There is
played.
the big bean.
There still is. It's upstairs. We played
It's
and we
very
played
big.
like a card game, like kind of a.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't Exploding Kittens, but it was something
It was
along
like
the
a
lines
monster
of that.
thing. I think you made a monster maybe.
Because
in
I
a
was dating
laboratory.
somebody else who has like an enormous game library that takes up an entire floor of their house.
Oh wow.
And they had come over and we had played some games, and I was like, "Oh, I have a date idea."
Yeah, it requires.
It's a card game.
It's an activity we can
And
do
tomato
together.
soup. To show off my cooking skills.
So I was the first lady person that you dated in a serious way. Because
Yeah,
you had other partners
definitely.
who were female.
Yes. And as those relationships developed or kind of stayed the same, and I was really comfortable with that level. And it seemed like everyone around me was like really quickly trying to level up. And I was like, I'm really cool here with having coffee with a lot of people and sort of getting in touch with their family life so I can sap some family energy off of them since I never get to be in a family again. It was, looking back on it, it was selfish and it was a little vampiric, because I was so sad and feeling robbed of the things that I had valued, that whenever I saw somebody who was like stable and healthy in their relationships, I wanted a piece of them. And I definitely, like Justin, I don't think that our relationship was exempt from that. I think that I saw you as a mentor and somebody who, could guide me into this new world. Which in many ways was a beautiful thing, and it continues to be part of our friendship.
Absolutely.
But it also meant that, at times when you came to me and said, hey, this thing that's going on in our relationship is hurtful, all I heard was, you're doing polyam wrong.
Right.
And I was like, but I followed the rules. Like, cause that's what relationship anarchy is you make rules with somebody and then you follow them and then you have a good relationship.
Because anarchy is totally about
yes,
rules.
all the rules. So, but I was trying to learn. So, I read Boundaries first, which really kicked off the whole thing. I was like, wait, everyone should know this and nobody knows this. And I started just drawing, these huge black and white boundaries all around me, like, get out of my space. Which again, sort of a delayed adolescence thing that was really unattractive in a 25-year-old. But
Can you talk a little bit about what that is? I don't know Boundaries.
So the Boundaries book, let's see if I can get it right, is
I see your face, Jess. Like, I know. I don't know Boundaries. That's correct. But I'm talking specifically.
What are these boundaries of which you speak?
I read a book called Boundaries by Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend that lays out basically how to have more successful is the wrong word, more harmonious relationships by not taking on baggage from other people and by not making other people responsible for your baggage. And they lay it out much more brilliantly, and everyone should definitely read this. It was still, at least to me, and maybe I was just reading into some things, it was still very Christianese to me.
Yes.
So it flowed with where my mind was already at and kind of transitioned me away from some of the more strict rules that I got.
Do you still recommend the book though?
I recommend it especially for people I know who are still involved in those fundamentalist circles,
Awesome.
because I feel that anyone who reads it can see how this is biblical and how this is God honoring, and also be exposed to some really important research that is true about how relationships can be better for everyone involved.
Specifically capital R relationships or just any interpersonal relationship?
Interpersonal relationships. And I think they've done some different editions now that reference specific types, like specific contexts or age groups. I think there's one specifically for teens, one specifically for marriages. But the book that I read included marriages, family relationships, like parent-child relationships, workplace, anywhere that you can start to infringe on emotional space of others, or they can do the same to you. And it really revolutionized the way that I was thinking and prepped me, because pretty much like very quickly after that, I launched into The Ethical Slut. I read Daring Greatly, Brene Brown's book. I read The Art of Asking. So it was like this like artistic, spiritual like overlap that opened me up to think that all of these different perspectives shared ideas that were important and could create a more complete ethic for me to live by.
I'll make sure, sorry to interrupt you, I'll make sure I put all the like links to these books in our show notes. So that if you want to check them out, if you feel like this applies to you, if you identify with Hannah's story, then you can go get some reading up done.
I've done all this research, or at least from my perspective, I was participating in online forums. I was developing my vocabulary around feminist and kink and polyam issues, and I felt like I was armed to go out into the world. And then immediately, that series of relationships was maybe not what those partners expected. For a number of reasons, not least of which was that I talked a better game than I was capable of executing. I had read books. I had not been in a lot of relationships.
That's really a problem with, once you learn the terminology, you're like, I am an expert at this terminology, but I have no model for applying it to myself directly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I wanted out of it was to be very precise in my communication so that I could explain to someone, hey, this is what I'm about. This is what I believe. This is what I am looking for. And I guess just that level of talking that talk got me into repeated trouble where I had to be like, and also I just got out of a cultish situation and I have a ton of baggage that is now also your problem. Because Cult without a V. The not sexy kind. I think the term we use is high demand group. Yes.
That's some spin.
Yes.
Right there.
A group with high demands, not a group in high demand.
Exactly. A group that placed a high level of demands on my personal life.
I was going to say, because we're kind of a high demand group.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think boundaries and consent matter a lot in whether your high demand group is positive or negative.
Yeah. If they don't support boundaries or consent, then maybe it's not that positive.
Yeah. Though I started to level out, and recognize my personal limitations as an introvert, as somebody who loves investing deeply, and actually miraculously found people that valued that and that were willing to invest deeply in me. And I started to get the idea that maybe family and romance and long-term partnership are not impossible. They just require work and a shift of mindset. Met Max and Justin, that came very quickly into focus for me, which was an amazing experience. I felt like this extended, life-changing thing, but it was really a whirlwind of just a couple of years where I was figuring out, getting way excited, messing up, leveling off to a place where I could more safely and more from a more grounded space kind of try new things, meet new people.
So you talked a lot about family. Where are you right now with your life? How do you view family now? Because I talked about, especially in the last episode, I talked about the fact that for me, the concept of blood relatives has a level of toxicity to it because of my life experience. And the concept of family as a chosen family is where I really feel that family, quote unquote, exists for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that I've learned a lot from you about chosen family and the ways in which that is valid and crucial, I think, to survival, at least and for me. And also, I would say, initial tumultuous way of trying to set or correct a bunch of boundaries with my family of origin that I hadn't had the opportunity to maintain. It felt catastrophic. It felt like I was losing everything that mattered, but it isn't. And I think that staying open and staying true to myself during that time was difficult, but it has paid off in some really unexpected ways in relationships with my siblings and with my mom. And I'm really grateful. I didn't assume that I would still have those opportunities a few years later. I thought that relationship might just be over for all intents and purposes, but it has not been. And I think that as they have seen that I am not just like going off my rocker, because when that relationship is broken and maybe they don't realize it, you're just quiet. Then when you stop being quiet, it seems like everything is happening all at once. So those years where I was thinking differently about relationships and thinking differently about what my needs were and what my plans for the future were, but not communicating that with others, I think were opportunities lost. I think I was acting according, to my abilities at the time, but definitely I want to take that moving forward and think about, my blood family and my chosen family to maintain those lines of communication a lot better. It's gonna make a huge difference in how we move forward together.
We can, cut or edit or whatever, or if you just don't want to talk about it. Because growing up in the church and faith and stuff is such a big part of your story and your identity, do you want to talk about where you are with that now? Or not?
Sure.
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things I had decided I couldn't have both worlds. That if I was going to be queer, then I could not also be Christian. And that's definitely the way that I was taught.
I'm here to tell you that Jesus loves you.
Oh, thank you. And Justin, you have told me that since day one. And that has made a huge difference in my life. And I will say this is not just what was preached at me. It also has to do with, the folks the handful of people that I had as models, for people who are living alternative lifestyles or coming out in all of these various ways to their Christian families and churches, were then in short order leaving the church altogether. And so that was the pattern that I thought was just inevitable. And I was like, how am I going to guard against this? What am I going to hold on to? And it was really disorienting for a while. I went through the process of excommunication with my church. So they basically revoked my baptism and said I was never a Christian in the first place.
Yeah. Can we touch on that for a minute? 'Cause there was a really bad thing happened. The Orlando massacre happened.
Yeah.
And, you and I were dating at the time. Mm-hmm. And I remember that was that seemed like one of the harder things for you to deal with in being around your congregation and supporting them and servicing them by playing piano.
Yeah, so the year before that, right, was we all celebrated marriage equality, and that was the first Pride that I was out to myself. Mm-hmm. I went out dancing with strangers. It was this glorious, just cup overflowing moment. And I remember tumbling out of a club with scores of other people into, the 2 a.m. street and just staring up at the stars, in trance and going, everyone who hates me is about to die. This is the last generation that believes these backwards things and hates for people who are just trying to live life genuinely and joyfully as themselves is gone. They're practically gone. They're irrelevant, and we are all the future. And it was just amazing. It was, one of the most powerful moments of my adult life. So then 1 year later, I was sitting in church trying not to cry because of what had happened in Orlando, and just trying to put it aside and live my separate life, right? Because I was at church and we have music, we have a routine here.
You're the good girl.
I'm the good girl.
Right.
I can keep it together for a few hours and not have this, one world infringe on the other. But it was referenced from the pulpit.
By your father?
By my father, yeah. So, and that was sort of a special period of prayer. I think it was genuinely and compassionately meant. I think that the main purpose of that prayer was that there would be peace, and that there would be, repentance that brought about peace, and that our culture would change. None of these things were new. None of this was shocking to me. But there was a phrase in that prayer reminding the congregation that those who were the victims were in hell with the shooter. And I had an out-of-body experience, which actually was not that new to me. I'd been sort of leaving myself in church for a while.
So
it was not a spiritual ecstasy. I was just,
not to get all
dissociative.
psychological. And everything, but were you just dissociating, do you think? Or
I was, and I think because I was surrounded with people who had changed my diapers, know, there was no room for me to express the emotions that I was having. Certainly not any dissent, but also not discomfort either. And so I fixed my face and just sort of left, usually to some sexual fantasy, right? Because I was a kid and that was a thing. And I could just like be off in my own world while, things that I felt were damaging were being said, which was self-preservation.
Absolutely.
But, by the time I'd gotten to that moment with that specific prayer, with that specific context, it was like, if they knew that they were talking about me, they couldn't say this anymore. Like, if my father knew that I had been out dancing at a gay bar and I had had this amazing, life-changing, positive experience, and then he found out the next day that I was dead, he couldn't stand here and do this. In the intervening years, I don't believe that anymore.
You don't believe that he wouldn't?
I think he would be the same person that he is now, with the same set of beliefs.
But you understand that has nothing to do with who you are.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because of the four of us,
Yeah.
you are by far the one who eats, breathes, lives compassion.
Mm.
And if I had to say, this person is Christ-like, it would be you.
Mm. Oh, thank you. Well, so that was definitely a moment where, because those worlds had touched and it had nothing to do with me, right? It was purely circumstantial that those things came together. I couldn't be in denial about how they impacted each other anymore. And that really did catapult me out, permanently. But it didn't completely divorce me from Christianity. If for no other reason than like that is my faith of origin, like that is where I come from, and that can never not be true about me. I can certainly reject it. I can come to other beliefs, but I can't not be Christian for the first, 25 years of my life. So after I learned that I was going to be excommunicated, because there's a very formal process that you have to go through. So I had come out to my parents kind of under duress. They knew something was going wrong. I think they genuinely wanted to help. The ways in which they wanted to help would not meet my needs. So
at this time, it's not only about coming out to your parents as queer, it's about the fact that you were dating a husband and wife separately.
Right.
And so
so I completely skipped that part. Thank you. Let me roll back here. So I had a conversation with my mom that was, her inquiring about my spiritual health. I seemed distant. I was living with my brother, so I was less supervised than before. She was worried about me. And I had basically said, I'm going through a rough time right now. I'm not ready to talk about it. I'm going to try to be ready to talk about it by an arbitrary time frame that they had set, 3 or 6 months. I don't remember. In the meantime, please stop policing my whereabouts, because if I wasn't at church or if I was late to church, it was very obvious to everyone that I would get called out. And that was becoming this huge point of anxiety for me, because I never knew what I was going to encounter and how I was going to react. And I was doing a poor job of the whole disembodied thing that I had been working so hard to perfect. It just wasn't working for me anymore. I had told her I was trying to figure it out, that I would try to be honest when I could. And so they had set sort of a time frame on that. And so the time frame came up, and then it was like, okay, intervention. And I thought the intervention was about the fact that I was dating women. Like, this is the thing that I had been having nightmares about. This is the thing that I had rehearsed with my mom. Like, I had this recurring dream where my mom was crying at me and just saying, "But you were never gay before." I knew how absurd it was, but it was so devastating. And I had to be like, "Mom, I can't explain it. I know that I wasn't gay before, but I know that I'm gay now, okay? Like, you just have to work with me, because this is much more upsetting for me than it is for you." So all of this while I'm carrying on like 3 relationships with women, right? So there's not a whole lot of ambiguity here. Yeah. But it still felt complicated. So this is what I had braced myself for, and we decided to go to lunch, and I had an appointment immediately after. So I had given myself a hard out to say, like, we're going to discuss what we can discuss, and then I'll see you later, or not, or never again. And I sat down, and all they wanted to talk about were specific people I was friends with on Facebook. So someone was doing some detective work that was just way beyond what I thought that their, like, interest level, first of all, and also skill level was capable of. And I remember calling Max somewhat in shock from the bathroom afterwards, going, I think one of my siblings outed me. Like, the information they had was both too specific and not pertinent. Like something happened, like somebody got their wires crossed. So they were asking me, why are you friends with a trans woman? Don't you know that, evil companions corrupt good morals? Are you dating this person? And at that time I was like, no, we dated for a while. We're not dating now. We're still friends because she's my friend. Like, I don't understand the question. And then it was, who is Chasten? Who is Max? Are they married? Leading questions that they already had the answers to, and I felt like, oh, I'm being set up. Like, this is not just, why are you gay now?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And nobody
I was
expects
shutting
an
down.
Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Reformed Inquisition. Even when they set a lunch date for it, we still don't expect it.
If it's on Google Calendar.
And, like, once we got through, like, why are you friends with trans people? Which was just like,
yikes.
So I was kind of numb, I was like processing that. Then we got to, why are you dating married people? Which covered the entirety of the rest of my relationships that I had going on. And again, like, that was not the line of questioning I was prepared for. To me, my identity changing and my, sexuality and my expression of that changing were the big topics of the day. What individuals had consented to among one another just didn't matter to anyone but to us. Like, I was already completely, in a different mindset. So, I didn't know what to say. I just said, like, yes, they are married. Yes, we are dating. No, we're not dating as, like, a couple and me, because as we moved forward, I started to hear in sort of my mom's line of questioning that she thought I was becoming a victim to a predatory couple, which was not an out of the way, like, thing to wonder.
No,
right?
I mean, that's
as a mom, that is absolutely
to get out of being a victim from a predatory couple.
right.
Oh, burn.
So that's what I got. I got, this is happening to you because of trauma you had. And they were not talking about the trauma of, like, that family environment or the church environment. They were talking about the trauma of my first boyfriend coming out as gay. And they're like, that's not your fault, right? And I'm like, this is not about him. I haven't spoken to him in years. What is your angle here?
Oh, so your courtship.
My courtship, yeah.
Oh, that wasn't mentioned.
Okay, so my courtship ended. And like I said, like, naturally, because we were at different points in life, but what he said to me was, I just can't be the man you need me to be right now. And then he disappeared. And it became obvious. So it became obvious as time went on, although we really haven't conversed since then, that he was in the process of coming out to his family at that time and just didn't have it in him to handle it head on with me. And honestly, at that point, at 21, I wasn't ready to deal with it. I would have lost my shit. So I don't blame him for not wanting to talk about it. But it was really bewildering in those moments as, as young people who were navigating their very first relationship. It was tough. And it was tough for at least a couple years afterward that I didn't want to even think about any other relationships. Mm-hmm. So, my parents knew that about me, and they knew that it had been difficult.
Thanks to your courtship buddy for driving you into our household.
Absolutely, yes. All credit goes to Courtmate. And then the showmance that I had like immediately after that ended with like the guy saying that he had feelings for someone else. And I was like, so what? Like, I'm not here to talk about your feelings. Like, we had an agreement where I was the girlfriend. So am I the girlfriend or am I not the girlfriend? Because you're a theater major. You kiss whoever you want. But like, am I the girlfriend? And like making him say it, which was a little vindictive, but also put me in a good direction. And that was a crisis moment as well, as I was like, I'm really sad that this relationship is ending. It seems super unfair because I don't understand why he can't have a crush on somebody and also just uphold his end of the bargain with me. And I don't understand why he should unilaterally get to end this. It was a lot, but it also was the first time I realized that it really didn't matter to me. It mattered a lot to him.
That somebody you were involved with had feelings or the capability of having feelings for somebody else.
Right. And I continued to, quote, be in love with him for the next 6 months of my rebound relationship. I still wanted to be with both of them. I just knew that option wasn't open to me. And so I started to do my research and realized that finding people who want the same things that you want is the key to your relationships. Instead of constantly trying to make the people who are like just right next to you want the same things that you want. To cycle back. I had that confrontation with my parents, and that sort of started a legalitarian process of kicking me out of the church because I was an unrepentant sinner, specifically for the sin of being in a relationship with 3 people who were married.
You're an adulterer.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and they directly asked me, are you in a physical relationship?
Oh, wow.
And I said, that's not an appropriate question, and I'm not going to answer that with my dad. Which I think they took to mean yes, and they probably told the rest of the church that I was in an adulterous relationship. So
they're like Hannah's not saying anything, but
and you know what that means.
She's prowling around. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I am so sorry that you have gone through all of that and all of that just systematic self-loathing. But I am so glad that we know you for it and that you are part of this family.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sorry for it. It's informed who you are now.
Well, it's informed who you are now, but
it sucks, but
I think that your level of compassion is really,
I would say I would definitely not be me without every bit of that.
Yeah.
I also don't want it to happen to other people if we can help it. But yeah, no, I'm so incredibly grateful to be on the other side of that with this pod set of relationships still intact and like growing and deepening through it, because that was not at all a given. That was an enormous and enormously unfair amount of pressure to put on a fledgling relationship like Justin and I had at that time. It was excruciating for pieces of it, and you supported me the very best that you could.
I don't know. It was the best that I could at the time. Yeah.
Well, that's right. We were all doing the very best we could at the time, and I will always be grateful for not having to go through all of that alone. And I guess the flip side of that is like maybe I could have just kept going along to get along if we hadn't been in those relationships, but I don't think so. I think that my time of having a foot in both worlds had run out, and that was going to happen one way or the other. So I'm really glad that it happened with us.
So how are you feeling about now living with your partner, living with your metamor, who's also your ex-girlfriend? How is that all feeling for you?
Amazing.
Yeah?
Yeah. In the sneaky way where it kind of, in a sneaky way where everything feels really natural, and then I get startled and I'm like, I live here with my favorite people in the world. They're just here all the time. And I also am here all the time. It hits me at random times of work, and especially when I'm walking to my car, I'm like, I get to go home now. And always. I'm still on a high. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You didn't mean sneaky in the sense that, like, when you come out of the kitchen and there's somebody that's standing there, you're not used to it.
Okay, so also that.
People, and then you jump and...
There are also people around me all the time now, and as an introverted person, you know, I get maxed out. But I think we all...
out?
Quite literally. Oh, yeah.
And Olivered out, and, you know, whatever the case may be. And then I retreat, which is, I think, one of the brilliant things of how we came about this from the very beginning was, what if we shared space in a way that respected everybody's personal space?
Yeah. So, yeah, just to explain that, you know, we have a 3-bedroom house, and Max and Hannah and I, Chasten, have our own spaces, and we share our communal spaces. And right now, Hannah and I sort of have a craft room that's in boxes and all over the floor, but we'll figure that shit out. And Eric lives separately in his bedroom across town.
Well, all along, whenever we talked last time, and maybe even the time before, about having domestic plans, domestic daydreams, domestic whatever, and all along, you and I talked about the absolute necessity of everybody having their own space.
Right.
Because
and that was before you and I had separate bedrooms.
Right.
That was when you and I were still sleeping together in the same room, and I was still following you around the house. I still understood the concept that, like, you got to have a little bit of corner of the world for yourself. Right.
Yeah, just the psychological impact of having something that, like, I share everything else with everybody else, but this is mine.
Right.
Like, this is my, you know. And also, as difficult as one relationship with one other person is and can be, the more people you add to it, the more difficult it can be.
And with 6, you get egg roll.
And then, like, you got to be able to run away. You got to be able to close a door, you know? I just kept rolling past that. It's fine.
What?
Never mind. Go on.
It's fine. In Eric's case, he just has to drive home. It's like a 15-minute drive, right?
Yeah, it's not far.
No, it's not far at all. So.
And he drives like a goddamn maniac.
Well, you say I could drive like a goddamn maniac.
And then Eric passed us on the interstate that night. And now I know.
So I've proven that I don't drive like a goddamn maniac?
No, just slightly less of one.
No, it's highly
So he's 10,000 maniacs, and I'm like 999.
I am not Natalie Merchant.
Hannah was listening to Natalie Merchant the other day, and I really wanted to call her out on it, but I'm sorry. I got to do that.
Look at the shock.
I know, shocked. I'm so shocked.
I thought you would be
There's nothing wrong with
charmed
her. I'm
by
just
my
not
idea
her.
to get ready to an entire
We're
Natalie
getting back on
Merchant
track.
station.
Yeah.
So, do you want to just, like I asked Chasten last time, do you just want to put a pin on where you are today, people-wise, relationship-wise?
Who's who in Hannah's world?
I have my partner, Max, and my metamor, Chasten. We are housemates, and my good friend, Eric.
That other guy.
That other guy. A long-distance housemate, if you will.
Yeah, really just long distance. Eric lives here. He just doesn't have the same zip code.
My petamor, Oliver. Who also factors into the home life.
Who, by the way, couldn't look more pleased.
Yeah,
at the moment.
I think the dog loves the podcast. I think he's into it.
I still talk with all of the members in my family of origin. Still have great love for all of them. We're developing in our relationships. Me and Christianity are doing the same. Just forging a new path with new sets of influences, new sets of boundaries that are expanded greatly from where I ever thought we would be. I'm really grateful right now.
Good. You know, you shared with us, you shared a couple podcasts that sort of pertain to spirituality and a relationship with a fundamentalist background. And I think one of the podcasts, we've got it listed on your profile on the website. The website is www.podpodcultcast.com.
Cult with a V.
And so you can check out Hannah's bio there, and she has some podcast suggestions. But if somebody was in your position and coming from a background of conservative Christianity, what resources would you recommend to them to help them process, like, you know, maybe 2 or 3 resources? You've mentioned a couple of books, but, you know.
Sure, yeah, I mentioned boundaries because that really bridged worlds for me and helped in a way that was very evangelical friendly for me at that time. Mm-hmm. As I've grown, the Liturgist podcast has also been really important conversations for deconstructing Christian experiences, as well as the Kitchen Table Cult podcast. And more recently, Exvangelical, I would also recommend as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for sharing a lot of that. Eric, looked surprised at one point. You didn't know a lot of that, did you?
No.
No. Okay. I think that's
still the new guy.
Eric's the new guy.
Oh, that's amazing. I think I just always assumed that I was like on my shoulder, like you can see all the funny stuff.
I just tape a sign to your back, so when we're at parties and
Thank
things,
you.
everybody knows. Like,
Okay.
This is where Hannah comes from. Please don't return her there.
No.
She has a new address now.
If you're enjoying the Pod Cultcast, you can thank our Patreon subscribers, Jenny and Sydney. They've made our theme music possible. To thank them, we'll be sending them some sweet Pod swag and give them access to exclusive content. If you'd like to be awesome like Jenny and Sydney, head over to www.patreon.com/podcultcast. That's cult with a V, and choose your subscription level. Each level comes with its own fun perks. Thank you so much, Jenny and Sydney.
Well, I don't want to take this from being the episode about you to being the episode about faith, but since we are talking a lot about faith and we still are in the getting to know us area.
Oh, absolutely.
You, Chasten, talked last time about growing up in the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
And you're still there, right? Like
Yeah.
you're
I still identify as a Christian. I don't identify as a churchgoer right now because I have made a decision in my life to not interact with people whose minds I can't change. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there's a lot of conservatism that just hides in little corners of the world that I try not to go there because I have trouble being around people who don't support that Jesus loves me and don't support that I can do whatever the fuck I want to. So long as I'm not hurting somebody consensually.
And to quickly cover my own stuff, I grew up in a completely secular family with no church exposure at all, except going to vacation Bible school because all the rest of the kids in my neighborhood were going, and I wanted something to do on those evenings too.
I didn't even do that.
And about the time that Chasten and I were starting to date, I had a weird conversion experience that, I'll probably talk about at some point, but a weird conversion experience. And I don't know, a year into us dating, I got baptized. I got later.
At the time I was summing up our dating life as like sex and church.
Yeah.
We were fucking and going to church, and sometimes we were fucking after church, and that was okay too.
And
there was that one time we were fucking in church.
No, that didn't happen.
No.
That didn't happen.
And,
there was that one weird time I masturbated in church, but we're not even going to get into that.
Come on, dude.
I know.
And I later got confirmed in the Episcopal Church, and I'm still, I still consider myself kind of high church Episcopalian.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're more on the Anglican side of things, but we're not on the, we're not in the, it's very much the liberal United States Episcopal Church with gay female priests and stuff. There are still places in the world where the Episcopal Church is still very conservative, especially in Africa, still in England, like about same-sex coupling and marriage and all those things. And my spirituality is a little wonky because I grew up in the Episcopal Church, but my mom was very much a network kind of person. She wanted to network with people, and there was a time, especially in our theater group, where a lot of the people we were around all the time were Catholic. So we started going to the Catholic Church, and then I was in a production of Godspell with the kid who played Jesus and his brother who did sound. I was sort of dating both of them, so I kind of left that out of my polyamorous story. And they were Pentecostal. So I spent 4 years in my teens going to the Church of God 3 times a week. But I was also a practicing Wiccan and dabbling in Judaism and Buddhism and reading up on a lot of Eastern philosophies. And my mom was she let me experiment and dabble and go to the New Age section in the bookstore. So now with my spirituality, I'm very much a believer in the historical Jesus Christ, and that being close to God does not mean being pure. It means being compassionate and giving. But I also believe in sort of a universal energy that I can't explain, and that might be God. I really don't know. So I'm a little bit, got some pagan stuff in me. I'm a little bit woo-woo. So I call myself an Episcopagan, which I coined from my childhood best friend. So Grace, if you're out there, thank you. So my religious background is a little all over the place, but definitely a high church, very ritualized experience in my Christian life.
Yeah, I don't want to reduce Hannah to a resource, but one of the things that I do appreciate about you having had that experience growing up within that tradition is you're really, really knowledgeable about Christianity in general and about the Bible. As someone who is still learning, like, it's nice to go to you and go like, hey, what is this thing? What does this mean? Mm-hmm. Like, where does this come from? Yeah. And I appreciate that you always have an answer.
Oh, thanks. It's been a lot more useful and increasingly more relevant than I thought it would be. But
Eric, how's your spirituality doing over there? Godless wonder?
Yeah, I'm a heathen. No, I never really had any of that stuff at all, because the shortest way to say it was my dad's a biker, my mom's a hippie. They did their own things, didn't impart them upon me. Never went to church, didn't need to, kind of figured a lot of stuff out on my own. I think if there were to be some branch of a spirituality that I would lean towards, Taoism.
Okay. So, Hannah, anything else you'd like to add about your experience and where you're getting to? I mean, we've got a whole lot of podcast episodes ahead of us, too. No? She's just shaking her head, looking at me and smiling, and now she's giggling, so that's what's happening.
That's all I got, folks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing and being open.
Great job.
Yeah, good job. And next episode, we're going to finally get into Eric's origin story. And so wait for that to come out. And again, thank you to our supporters and our listeners. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. This has been the Pod Cultcast. You can catch us on the web at podcultcast.com.
Cult with a V. Sorry, I kind of spaced out for a second.
It's okay. I know that I'm mesmerizing to that. So bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.
You've just heard the Pod Cultcast with your hosts, Max, Chasten, Hannah, and Eric. Our theme song is Spencer Blues by Lobo Loco. Our break music is by Gabbarino. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or your favorite podcast destination. Thanks for listening.